Hey everyone, it's TTL back with your 3090 review. Now we've done an awful lot of testing with these, and straight off the bat I'm going to say we're going to do different stuff with the graphs because there was a lot of people that watched the video of mine for the first time and didn't like the scrolling graphs. So we're going to get much more static time, but we do need to be able to move them a little bit so that we can show you all of the data, and there is quite a bit. We've done some 8K stuff as well. We have also done DSR for those of you out there that have got a 4K screen but want to up sample. So we've done some testing on DSR for you as well. With control, we actually used F1 2020 and we did Microsoft Flight Simulator just to completely cripple the graphics card, which is a really good way. And we will talk about the in-depth sort of stuff. We've got the two here. So the MSI, which is slightly more expensive, is 1529, and then the Gigabyte comes in at 1449. So we have a bit of a range of price, exactly the same as we did with the 3080. But we should move on rather rapidly because I don't want this video to be 3 hours long. Okay then, so the two GPUs, and if you saw the review of the 3080s, then with all due respect, the only difference in reality, just to look at them briefly, is the SLI stroke NVLink parts on the card, because they are, other than that, I know they've got more memory chips and stuff like that hidden underneath, but to look at them from the outside, they are completely identical, to the point where if I put the Gigabyte one, now the 3080 is the one underneath, and then you've got the 3090 above, because you can tell because of the NVLink. There we go, you can see what I mean. They are the same size, they've both got two 8 pins, they've both got the 3 fans, the width is the same, it's all exactly like that. And the only bit that's RGB is the little Gigabyte logo. Don't need to show you any more of that. With the MSI, it's the same thing. It's exactly the same as the 3080. It's just got a different core on it, and obviously a few more memory chips. We've got 3 8 pins on it. And this bit lights up RGB. You've got some small bits down here, RGB, and you're thinking to yourself, Tom, you're rushing for a change. Why is that? And that's because aesthetically, they're exactly the same as the 3080s. They just cost pretty much twice as much. So where does that performance or that price, you know, where does it all sort of like start to fit in and come together? So let's just crack on and get on with it. Okay, so we're very quickly into the performance testing, and we are going to do the graphs in a slightly different way today. We do still have to move them though because they are massive, but we're going to show big pauses, and we are also going to show you the full one as well so that you can get a good feel for everything that's going on. But the first one's actually a small one, so that comes up rather nicely, and that is clock speeds. Now, the most important thing with the clock speeds, you've got the rated boost speed, then you've got the peak, but then the most important one is the average, which we take over a 30-minute run with Unigine in 4K. And the average one is where it's the average clock speed. The higher that is, then the higher it is consistently throughout the run. So that's the reason why that is more important than just a plain and clear peak speed, because the peak might only be there for a second, but if you've got something that's running higher over the average, then that's where your faster card is. It's not always about the absolute bleeding edge speed. And then what we will do is look at the thermals. Now the thermals, despite the fact that they do use more power, which I'll show you in a minute, they are actually cooler and they do stay in a really good way. But the thing that I will say is between them, there's actually not a great deal of difference. Despite the fact that the MSI has technically got a bigger cooler, the Gigabyte is better made, and it does have that pass-through bit, which I don't know particularly whether that makes a great deal of difference on the back plate, as you will have seen earlier on. Like I've said, it's exactly the same as the 3080. When you bang them all in the graphs, they do kind of well. And yes, that is a lot of temperature testing, but at the end of the day, if we don't compare to the older generation, how are we going to know whether they're doing better this time? So there's a lot of data there in the graph for you to pick through should you want it, but power draw is more important. Now they do top the graph in this because they do use a lot of power, but that's because the TDPs have been turned right up. We've obviously got more CUDA cores as well, so there's a reason for them to draw that amount of power. Now that is a complete system. That is how much our 3950X system pulled from the wall with the entirety, like with the graphics card and everything. Again, that was run using Unigine, which is a really nice way, and I actually do the temps, the power and the boost speeds all at the same time because I can have everything open and watching it. But you can see that the MSI did pull a fair amount more than the Gigabyte, and that should correlate into a decent amount of extra frames when we get into the game testing later on, but it was closer than you might have believed. But it does go to show you that the MSI native BIOS on the graphics card is giving it a lot more chance to perform better than the, I would say, semi-restricted version on the Gigabyte. But that could come down to the fact that MSI have obviously got an extra 8-pin power cable on theirs and Gigabyte didn't. They stuck with the dual 8-pin approach. But you do need to remember that the Gigabyte one isn't a top-end card for them. This is almost entry level as far as the 3090 is concerned from Gigabyte. And we will be getting the higher end ones with the Aorus branding slightly later on and further down the line. Now, when I move these graphs out of the way, I don't know when I do the edit whether I would have finished or not, but one of the things I do want to show you is we do have Crysis Remastered as in our test suite now. We did a game review on it earlier in the week, so it's now been put into the test, and I did do some 3080 testing with the Founders Edition to make sure that we had something to reference to with the main 3090 review. But one of the things I will say with Crysis Remastered, we literally do just go in, do the resolutions, and we just put it in high. We didn't do it with very high or can it play Crysis because the graph would be 3 miles long and people don't like the moving, so we kept it just on high, and it actually did give us a semi-decent frame rate for us to be able to play the game with. And when you look at the fact that we go down as low as a 1660, you can see that there's a lot of data there for us to be able to generally compare with. But the most important thing is if you look at the 4K results, even in high, you can see they do get down to that kind of 40, 50 kind of mark. So it's a very strenuous game. Obviously, Crysis, they throw a lot of polygons and it's just trying to render so much that even with the grunt of a 3090, you do hit the stoppers quite a bit. The other thing with Crysis, in reality, going into a games review, is it is actually really badly CPU limited, in the fact that it's still run on DirectX 11. Yes, it's got Vulkan nailed on the side, but it doesn't do it in a particularly good way. That's pretty much just how they got the ray tracing to work. And Crysis is very much one of the games that really, really would have done much better with DirectX 12 to take some of the system loading off with the CPU side of things. But when we move on, we can take a look at Gears 5. Now with Gears 5, what we do is we do lots and lots of tests with this, but for the bulk of this, you can see that we've got 4K in there, then we've got 150%, which would technically be 6K, and then 200%, which would technically be 8K. But it's all done within the benchmark, and it is pretty much upscaled. So you can take it with a pinch of salt, but in that graph, you can see randomly, and we did check this a few times as well, that the 3090 with Gears at least did worse than the 3080, but that could have come down to the fact that the clock speeds are slightly lower with the 3090, and that might be one of those old school games that just prefers the clock speed rather than the fact it's got a million extra CUDA cores available to it. Now, when we do talk about control, we do control several ways. So we do 3 resolutions, which should cover a lot of people, and we do that native straight out of the box with it on very high. Then what we do is we turn ray tracing on and we test it all again. Then what we do is we then add DLSS and we run it all again. Then what we do is we just have DLSS on without the ray tracing and we run it all again. But as you'll see later on, we actually have done, because we've got the beta from Nvidia, we have done a DLSS 8K run as well, which is a bit nuts. And even I was surprised with how pretty that looked. So with the first one, it's all the resolution. So this is the main one for you. You've got the 1080, 1440 and the 4K. The 3090 is at the top of the graph. But if you have a look, there's about 4 frames difference with the Gigabyte to the MSI right at the top of the graph in 1080. But to be fair, with these kind of graphics cards, it's the smaller bars that you want to be looking at because of the 4K. And they're the ones where you can see that they're coming in around that kind of 50 frames mark. But it does mean that you get about 5 frames a second extra compared to the 3080. Out of the way first. In fact, let's just go into the 8K gaming. So, with Microsoft Flight Simulator, it actually crippled it. It was just... basically what I did is I went into the Nvidia control panel, I turned on DSR, turned it up to 4 times. Now I'm on a 4K screen, so then it technically it was rendering 4 times 4K to get to 8K. And I think that's something a lot of you do need to kind of remember, is you've got 1080p. If you go up to 4K, there's 4 times the amount of pixels. If you've got 4K, going up to 8K is quite literally 4 times the amount of pixels again. It's insane. So Microsoft Flight Simulator generally did cripple the system. I mean, we were getting below 20 frames per second with that on the 90s, and then scraping in at about 10 frames per second just below with the 80. I didn't see the point in going down to a 2080 Ti with this. But when we move on, Control was the one that really surprised me, because at the end of the day, Control is a resource hog. But when you do turn the resolution onto the 8K setting, the actual render setting is only 2560 by 1440. And then the DLSS magic curves all those lines and adds in all the details with the magic AI in the driver. So that's really where the performance comes from. It's the magic of DLSS. And I personally think that that's going to be where a lot of the horsepower with the 3090s and stuff going forward with massive resolutions is going to come from, because of that magic with the DLSS. It's going to mean that they can render a smaller picture but then make it look as good, or as we've seen with the 3080 launch, even better in a lot of regards. So you're going to be able to take something that technically should, like with Flight Simulator, run terribly in 8K, and then all of a sudden it's like poof, and it's running epic. Now, we did do F1 2020, and the reason why I did F1 2020 is it's not a massively strenuous game. So then with the DSR, by going up to the 8K image, we were still getting, as you can see here, the average frame rate was 74 and 76, but it was above 60 the whole time. I think the minimum frame rate was 61 and 62. So at that point, when you've got 60 frames per second, it's not exactly a competitive FPS with shooting and that sort of stuff going on, so you don't need 150 frames per second all the time. But with that, genuinely, it looked so pretty to the eye. It was lovely. And like I said, above 60 minimum again, but with all of those pixels going on was a bit nuts. We did do some content creation stuff as well. Now, we don't normally run these, but because it's where it's meant to be at, we thought we would... Now, I'll be completely honest, it's at this point that the audio is not going to match what's going on in the background, and it's why you can just see graphs. But what I will tell you is smaller numbers on Blender are better, and there's very little difference between the two. I actually wish with the Blender and DaVinci, with the next one, that we actually got at least tenths of a second readings rather than full seconds, because it doesn't do us a great deal of favours with being able to compare or seeing big differences. And when you move on to DaVinci, as you can see, it's 41, 42, 46. So the smaller numbers are better because it's a smaller memory time, but the difference between 41 and 42 could be a tenth of a second or 2/10 of a second, and it would be nice to know if there was a bigger gap. So that's something maybe, because these are benchmarks that Nvidia asked me to run, and I think that this is fine when you're comparing a 3090 to a 3080 as we are doing, but if we were comparing lots of different 3090s, the actual second difference isn't enough. So it's a very small weedy thing, and it's something that I am personally kind of saying about. But so with DaVinci, as you can basically see that there was 4 seconds difference between the Founders Edition 3080 and the Gigabyte 3090, and then another further second difference to the MSI with that slightly higher clock speed. With some of the other ones, like when we saw Blender and stuff before, it kind of like traded places, but normally the MSI was ever so slightly quicker. But like I said, it was a second difference, and we don't know whether it was 0.2 or whether it was 0.9. We have no idea. So it's nice for a generational graphics card difference, but to compare lots of 3090s, I don't think there's enough information there for us to draw too much of anything from, really, which is a shame. But maybe that's something that can be fixed for future stuff. Right, conclusion, and I'm filming it again because I need to get it done quicker. So, at the end of the day, the 3090, is it good value for money? No, it's not good value for money in the slightest. And to be fair, even Nvidia, no, it's not good value for money. It's an EPing card. It's about, this is the best that we possibly can do. There are 24 individual RAM chips on there. 24 individual 1 GB GDDR6 chips. I mean, just doing the maths with that, you know that there's going to be a big bit of difference, because this one's got 10, that one's got 14 extra. So straight away we know the memory is going to cost a lot more money. Also, when it comes to the core, the 3090 core, the speed bin inside of it, you know that they're going to be whittled down a little bit more even so. And that's also where a lot of the price is going to come from, because they're pretty much made all from the same silicon, yet these ones bin slightly differently. So there's that side of it. But at the end of the day, unless you've got something that's going to use the extra VRAM, the performance difference between the two is actually going to be very slight. So they're going to perform fairly similarly. A few frames here and a few frames there is never going to be worth spending twice the amount of money. But some of us out there, like, if you take cars into account, yes, you could go and buy a run-of-the-mill car, which is still going to do 70 mile an hour on the motorway, but the bloke in the outside lane that's still doing 70 mile an hour in his Lamborghini is sat there and it looks nicer and he's going no quicker. He could do, possibly, on the right roads, maybe a racetrack or something. But at the end of the day, that then brings me to something that I would like to draw a fair bit of attention to, and that's the guy in the inside lane in his cheap car, and then the guy in the outside lane in his Lamborghini. You're going to look at that Lamborghini and you're going to know that it's worth a lot more money. When you look at these cards, specifically, it's both of them, they both look exactly the same as the 3080 models. And I know that they have to come in on a price point, but at the end of the day, I do think that you need a bit of difference between one model to the other model. And it can't just be about a few extra frames and the extra VRAM. You know, some of us don't care, and we have a closed system, we don't care what it looks like. But when you get up to this kind of level of buying stuff, you kind of do give you do care what stuff looks like. You're going to be looking at the design of the card, and you are, not everyone, before people start putting in the comments, but a lot of us like stuff to look better. And I will say that the difference, and I'm not picking on Gigabyte, but the fact they are identical apart from that little bit of silicon on the end, it kind of lets the side down a bit. And if you're going to be charging all this extra money, then I do think the aesthetics really need to be specifically on point as well. And I think that side of it is something that across the board is going to need a little bit of looking at. The point with them, with the rendering and stuff, I used benchmarks that Nvidia sent me, and the 380 actually did better in the DaVinci and in the Blender, which was weird, which is why we tested it so many more times. But it does go to show that this is still a cracking card. So the point is, with the 3090, it's never going to win any value for money awards. It's kind of shock tactics, and yes, it does perform better. But I think what we've actually got here is a Goldilocks product. So this is the one for people that are just going to go out and buy it, and they just want to say that they've got the best, and it's all about, I've got a 3090, I've invested this, and I'm going to be going to get an 8K screen, and that's cool. But what this product also does is it gives those people something to go and buy, aspire to, and you know, pushed the limits, and people then, you know, when people start buying this stuff and then buying the 8K screens, that means the more people that buy 8K screens, that the price starts to come down. And that's the way the world works. But like I have said to you, it's a Goldilocks product. So what this has done is actually made the 3080 suddenly seem even better than it did a week ago. And a week ago, the battery was going to run out. A week ago, it was amazing because it was like cheaper than a 2080 Ti, but it was better performance. And now what this has done is made it look like, you know, it's not that far away from a £1,500 card, but it's half the price. So there's kind of some mixed stuff there. So yes, this is your 8K card. It definitely did better in some of the 8K stuff that I've done, and with the the DSR stuff and all that sort of thing. So this is kind of future-proofing. This is definitely that little bit of extra grunt. This is that 50 shot of nitrous on your already quick car. So it depends which way you want to swing. And it's all going to come down to you people. But one thing I would say is those of you that bought a 3080 and are now wondering if you should buy a 3090, I think it's a really tough choice, and it's probably one that for the bulk of you, I'm going to say that is where the sensible money is. But there are those of us out there, I could possibly be one of them, that will be looking at these, and it's that want to have the best. And it is better, it's just not that much better, and it's a real weird one, because it probably feels like it should have been about $999, but it's $1,499 at least, and that's an awful lot of extra money when you compare the two. And we do have to be fair about it, because it isn't twice the performance, but Nvidia would never said they did, and in all of the graphs and stuff they did, I was just surprised that in the bulk of titles that we've tested, how small the FPS difference was. And it wasn't a massive amount that was ever going to make any great shakes. It's almost like we were testing, in some of them, an overclocked version of the 3080. So I will leave that with you, because I don't want to go round and round in circles, and I did last time because I was searching for the words that I wanted to get out. So this is for your Lamborghini drivers, your Porsche, your Ferraris. It's all about the having that little bit extra and having the best, and also knowing that it's probably, especially with the VRAM, hardly ever going to be getting stressed. And what we now need is titles to take advantage of all of this extra VRAM. But then also, I wonder how long it's going to be, because we know they're coming, how much the 20 gigabyte versions of these are going to be, because there's leaks all over online now. We do know we're going to get 30, 80, 20 gigabyte models. But again, with those 20 gigabyte models, what games are actually going to take advantage of it? But I've enjoyed testing these, and I was surprised with a lot of the professional stuff, like I said, that this was still incredibly strong. And it's actually got me wondering which way I want to go with the upgrade for my dedicated like home built rig, because I need to do a custom build pretty soon. So yeah, I'm going to leave that with you. There's obviously a lot of this to be digested. I'm going to end up doing even more testing on these, I feel, to try and get down to the nitty gritty of certain parts. But for now, at least, with all of this information being thrown at you, this is Tiny Tom Logan with another video for you, out. And I was meant to have gone, ding! Love you, sis. But I had a bit of a brain fart right at the end.